the way.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Richard. Again, it's a pleasure for us to have such a powerful committee of legends in the making, talking about design enabled, well, design and art enabled by technology. We have Chad Knight, who is the head of Nike 3D design and a very compelling visual artist. Zach Lieberman, who's also an artist and an educator, who, among other things, is a professor at MIT Media Lab and also one of the founders of the School for Poetic Computation, and Daniela Paredes Fuentes, who is the founder of Gravity Sketch. So please, come on board, guys, and let's start this conversation. So first of all, thank you very much again for joining this fantastic conversation where we will be discussing the collapsation of the barriers that separate the imagined and intuitive world within all the way to the physical world, the material world. I would like to start right up with the first question. What do you foresee in the future regarding this specific topic? Maybe we can start with Daniela.
Yes. So for the future, I see the future as a place where ideas, where creativity, where designers no longer have to be restricted by the tools that they have available, where technology becomes a bit more natural or way more natural, and it becomes almost invisible. That really empowers designers and creatives to just express their ideas and materialize them in the most intuitive and easy way.
Fantastic. Now, following up, Zach.
Yeah, I want to actually just kind of reflect on what Daniela said about invisible. I feel like, increasingly computational systems are becoming more and more invisible, and they're becoming more a part of our everyday life, a part of our body, a part of how we interact and experience the world. And I think it's really important for artists and designers to be exploring these systems and really pushing them for more humane and poetic uses.
Great. What about you, Chad? What do you foresee?
Well, I have a few thoughts on it. I think that as we move forward, technology, the barrier to entry is going to go down, obviously, as knowledge increases and as computational power and energy available increases. This stuff's going to become much more accessible to more people, and I think that's going to really kind of change the dynamic of how a lot of this stuff works. I think it's just going to become part of how we live, to speak to the invisible part of it. But I think that there's a lot of things that have to happen first. I think there has to be a lot of standardization in these tools, a lot of work on UX so that you walk up to this stuff and it's intuitive. You don't have to, tap something 3 times just to interact with something that you would naturally do. And I think, honestly, moving into this technology is just kind of the natural evolution of humans. Like we've developed DNA to be able to evolve, we've consciousness, and now we'd be able to create something to help augment creativity and essentially give us access to whatever processes our subconscious is doing in the creative space, but have access to all those outputs that the computer's processing. So I think it's just going to be a really big shift and a really big just way of even perceiving how we look at things and how we work and how we create, and in a way that you can't even really express now. It's kind of, I view VR and 3D as kind of the operating system of where we're headed. So I think it's going to be very immersive, and I think it's going to be it's going to enable people to create in boundless ways, like she was saying, unlimited by physics in this world. So I think it's going to be an incredibly exciting time.
something that connects the work that you all conduct is this intuition, or correct me if I'm wrong, that we have to develop tools to create more intuitive ways of empowering designers, no? And that's something that is very present in your work, Daniela, as a founder of Gravity Sketch. What have you understood about this process by developing this tool? How does it change the relationship between the creator and the created piece?
It changes it dramatically. So I think tools like Gravity Sketch and VR and immersive tools, it's only at this point in time that we're able to access them. But in reality, it's something that everyone has been wanting to have available for years. Because it's just the most natural way to create. You're thinking about a three-dimensional idea, and what you want to be doing is creating in a three-dimensional environment, as opposed to having to translate your three-dimensional idea in a 2D representation and then having to do the same process backwards. So it is helping designers, creatives, artists just express their ideas quicker, but also understand subtleties of those ideas, so that they can progress their design in a much more interesting way. So right now,
give us a 30-second pitch of what is Gravity Sketch, in case someone here is not aware of your tool?
Yeah, so it's a 3D design and collaboration software that allows people to create in the most intuitive way by using immersive technologies. So you use virtual reality headset to be able to create something in real space, and you do it in the most natural way. So instead of having to go through a very process driven, kind of like logical and mathematical way to create a 3D piece of geometry like you would normally do in a CAD software, you just use your body and express what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and the software creates that.
Which I think is a very interesting contrast, because on one hand, technology enables a very intuitive approach to creation, but on the other hand, what I think is an interesting contrast to, let's say, Zach's work, is you're giving access to more people to coding, which is, it's a higher, let's say, it's a more complex process to understand how to create beauty through code. Mm-hmm. So what do you think of this contrast between making tools that enable it versus making systems that enable poetic coding?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say is that just in general, when you're building tools or you're building things that build tools, like, you're also building community. Like, probably the most important thing I would say is, like, Gravity Sketch is probably like it's an amazing tool, but it's also a community of creators, and so it's it's the same thing when you're doing open source. So I'm really invested in open source. So taking the things that we learn as artists, writing code, publishing other tools for artists and designers to work with software. There's the thing, which is the library of code. In this case, it's Open Frameworks, which is a kind of C++ library. But I think it really goes back to the community, that it's actually the tool invites people to come together and share ideas and share resources and, experiment and so on. And really, I think that it's, in a lot of ways, that's the most important part. I think the tools are important, but also the communities that form around them are the thing that make them really viable. In terms of code, I think it's really a beautiful and expressive medium. And it's one way where, when you're working with software, you can understand, what's happening at a low level with the computer. So when you're using Photoshop or Illustrator or any of these tools that designers typically use to make work, there are a set of algorithms and, processes that happen. And if you can be involved in the crafting of those processes, you can flip them and rearrange them and use them for your own perspective. So I think there's something really beautiful. It's also really hard. And the thing that makes it very hard is that you are oftentimes, as an artist, like, you're creating with code, you're creating the tool first, and then you're creating the artwork with that tool. So it's almost like a multi-step process, and it's really difficult. Sometimes you get so invested in the tool, you don't even leave enough time for the art. It's a challenging process, but I think it's also really beautiful to be kind of, try to have this conversation with this machine, which is really not designed to create poetry, not designed to create elegant work, and really try to push it in directions that are unexpected.
And in this sense, for instance, I would like you, Chad, to contrast this, because on the other hand, you are both an artist, an independent visual artist, but also part of a huge company that uses this kind of technology to create products. How do you feel about these technologies in both lines of your life?
So I thought it was really interesting what Zach touched on. That I just want to follow up on first, which has kind of become the foundation of my thinking for this stuff, is you create the tool that then creates the art. And really, I think that looking at these tools and looking at the progression of them, it really is how it seems to work. You have something you can't visualize, you visualize it, and by visualizing it, you create a new medium. And that, I think, is what's so fascinating about VR, is we have this new medium created that you can't work with in this universe. And then that tool creates art. And then you can describe that tool and use those tools to create a new tool. So it's just this system that keeps building in complexity. And my hope is that through that complexity, it becomes easier to use. In terms of, I guess it was education, I think that's just education in terms of what a lot of this stuff means is going to be very helpful for getting people in it. In terms of when we say VR, does that mean the goggles? Or does that mean it's truly this virtual universe that we're working in that's differently? I think that those are a lot of the things that are going to click for people soon, that are going to allow us to move into this space. And I think community is a huge part of it, because there's this shared learning, there's this shared experience part. But I think it's all kind of one thing. I think that community is also, creating these new ideas and these new code, which are new functionalities and capabilities that are just kind of mirroring what you can or can't do in this world. So I feel like we're over time solving these problems in the virtual environment, it's kind of an applied science. They're set there, and we're just knocking off the things that we can or can't do in this world that we want to be able to do over there. And it's just going to become more and more powerful, I think, as a tool for creation.
Now, like, we are probably just beginning to see the capabilities of technology enabling creativity. Like, I would like to drop some new trends and technologies to see what do you guys think will happen. Like, for instance, when we start seeing the involvement of generative adversarial networks or artificial intelligence and more complex tools that enable creation, how does that change the role of the creator?
Who wants to take this one first?
Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of work. I mean, right now actually, I know we've been going, we've done several rounds of questions, but I actually want to just pause for a second. And I meant to do this at the top, and I just want to reflect on the fact that it's not a normal time. I'm in New York. Mm-hmm. It's completely not a normal time. And I've been teaching today, and it's one of these days where I don't even know how to teach. I come into the classroom, I don't want to talk about sine waves and code examples. Like, I think it's a really important time for everybody in the world to be paying attention and listening and learning. And, I just want to mention it. I'm in New York, and I just wanted to, I didn't say it at the top, but I just wanted to kind of pause. And
I appreciate you bringing that up.
And to go back to the question, I think that I always feel like there are these waves, right? And there are waves where it's like, okay, there's something really popular, like it's machine learning, it's VR, AR. There's waves where there's a lot of development and it feels like, okay, there's a breakthrough and it could be a technical breakthrough. And those waves as an artist are really interesting to ride. That a lot of the times your job is to kind of find where the energy is and harness it and try to use it and to help, it can push you in different directions. So I think with machine learning, general adversarial networks, like there's a lot of potential to explore, new forms of imagery, or how can we, take existing imagery and see it in new ways. Like it's an exciting time, but also these things can be used for really terrible purposes. And so I think it's like we need to be having conversation. We need to be having critical conversations around them. As artists, we need to be exploring, creative uses of them, but also like being really careful that we're not part of somebody else's narrative. And I think sometimes, especially with machine learning, I see that it's big companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon that are shaping the narrative and the language around these technologies. And I always worry that we're kind of telling their story. And I really feel passionately, and I'm really touched by the other members of this panel talking about VR and how passionate you are about VR, like saying it's the operating system it's going to be the new operating system. Like, I think we need to bring that passion to these things, which are interesting, but then we need to write our own narratives and not, write our own stories with these things.
I completely agree. And when it comes to these capabilities enabling creativity, I think that you've seen a progression in that already with how technology is doing that. First, we were able to store stuff, so that enabled us to be more creative. We had access to stuff, and then we were able to visualize things that we can't visualize. And now we're getting access to thought processes that we don't have access to. So now we can filter through all these ideas that the computer generates that we might block out because there's such nonsense that our subconscious, like, don't show them that. That's a waste of time. It makes no sense. But with this generative computational way of working, we get exposure to all of these ideas, as nonsensical as they may be. But that's, I think, how beautiful ideas come about.
Yeah, I agree. It's just almost like continuously giving more tools to the creatives to be able to create even much more interesting work. So I think the role of the creative will always be necessary in there. And it's these technologies that we're developing that just kind of like unlocking deeper creative processes within the creative community.
One of my favorite recent examples I've seen, somebody took just a video clip of them waving their camera around on the street, and then they used some machine learning techniques to remove all the cars, to basically find all the cars on the street and remove them, and basically, and just say, here's what the world would look like if we had no cars, right? And it's a kind of, it's a sort of what if question. And I think a lot of times it's hard to figure out how to use these things to ask those questions, but I oftentimes think the best uses of these technologies are asking these like really interesting questions, allowing us to see things in a new way, or imagine what the world would be like, and we just have to be really conscious of the implications of these technologies.
Like sorry, Chad, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna add a question, something I've been thinking about lately, and I just wanted to get the panel's opinion on. So when it comes to the threat of AI, do you think that could be avoided or minimized if the AI, I don't even know how to say this probably, if the AI were planted into an avatar that was unaware of its surroundings like we are in our universe? Like if the AI was implanted into an avatar in a video game that then was doing its own exploration and learning, and you just learned from them.
Yeah.
Maybe that's us, Chad.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting to. Like, we're creating our own universe over there. And it's not that we're freaked out that how close computers are, or we are to computers. It's that we're building us. I mean, I think the bigger issue is like
I think the thing to be really afraid of is that we're feeding the data to these systems, and this data can be biased. It can have, it's learn, it really depends on how we train the data that we train them. And think of who is doing that, who are writing those algorithms, who are designing those data sets. Think about where that's happening. And, what I'm really worried about are our faith in these systems, and using these systems to make decisions and to kind of, add more automation to our life is also like, there's real risk involved in that. There's real, and it's not, I think it's not even like, okay, this AI is going to, like, it's not at that sort of far away place, but it's actually like really right now, the things that are happening right now with it. So I think we need to be really afraid of how we're putting sort of an unnatural amount of faith in how the language that we're using to talk about these technologies, and kind of not being critical about the way that they're constructed and who's constructing them and for what purpose. And, I don't know, the context is really important.
Yeah, and that we're already starting to see some of the flaws, right? And it's kind of like the parallel or the weirdness of, there's a big element of human error, because we are building these technologies and we're fielding the data and creating the algorithms. But then there's the other side, which is like, when do we lose control because of that human error? And then that intelligence becomes its own thing. So it's kind of like the funny part, that it's like, because we're creating it, that eventually we're going to be able to lose, or like we're going to be losing control of it.
And I would like to take, like, this moment, I think it's a very critical moment, like you mentioned, Zach. And I would like to ask you, like, how do you think technology can enable empathy? Like, in the positive side, how can we enable empathy and possibly lowering some of the hazards that we have as a society, such as inequality, through these kind of tools?
So, really good question. I mean, I think one of the things that it's both both a blessing and a curse, but I think we're in a really interesting moment where you can see so much video and images from around the world and from things that are happening in real time, that you can maybe you can't understand everything, and you need to be really discerning when you're absorbing a lot of media. But you also you can really, you can feel things. Like, you can feel things when you're in, in somebody else's stream. Like, I think there's something really, I remember when Periscope came out, and just the kind of magic of just seeing things that are happening live. And, I don't know. I think there are beautiful moments that are possible. But I think there's also just like intense problems and there's things that we need to be aware of. For example, like, as an artist, I'm quite interested in how the computer can understand that there's a body there, right? And for me, it involves sensors, maybe Kinect camera, leap motion, and different sensors that are like, I want my software to respect the fact that there's a human being, and that I want to be able to make things which are gestural. And, a lot of my interactive work is about kind of taking the body and expanding gesture. So that is coming from a very humane space, like trying to respect and respond to the body. But then you think about all the ways that these sensors could be used for surveillance and for for reading reading human expression, and tracking people on the street. And you can see like really dystopic uses for the same technologies I think empathy is a really hard word to, I don't have a great answer for that, but I think it's just something we need to be really thoughtful of.
What about you, Chad?
I think
how did you?
Well, no, I think it's interesting how there was that twist. You put that twist on it. I mean, because I think that VR enables empathy because you finally, but I'm looking at it from more of a VR perspective instead of like Periscope. I think is really interesting too because it gives you visibility to the fact, or even comprehension to the fact that there are so many stories out there. There's so many people out there. There's, you know, we're so immersed in just us that it's like you look at that and you realize that, wow, there's like everything that people are experiencing is that real for them. And to be able to experience it in VR potentially, potentially experiencing in VR enables you to look at life through those people's shoes. And I think that could be a really powerful tool, just in terms of being able to enable empathy that is kind of impossible to do without enabling people to experience it through someone else's eyes.
And what I would add on top of that is that by having access to these new technologies, we are suddenly being able to be more empathetic to the actual creators. So we're trying to understand, and that's, you know, something that we do every day. It's like understanding how people think, what goes throughout their brains when they're going through a creative process, and how can the tool become as natural as possible, because we're trying to enable as much people as possible to be able to create and communicate and express themselves, which is something that you sometimes see that doesn't happen. So we see it, for example, in Instagram or like social media. People have been able to express themselves through photographies, through text. What else can we do to allow people to keep expressing themselves?
So here I have like the ultimate philosophical point before we go back to the surface of the practical world. I want you to imagine a world where we finish collapsing all the barriers. Like we managed to have Neuralink and you can plug your brain. And that means that you can express yourself absolutely brain to brain, like anything that you can imagine can be transmitted, transformed. Do you think that could be the ultimate channel towards a complete empathy?
Well, it would definitely remove a lot of the miscommunication barriers. So, you know, you could probably understand where someone's coming from when they say something or when they try to express something. But I do think that, I mean, obviously, like we always think about that, right? Like, can it be just as easy as like thinking about something, imagining it, and just creating it? Would that be amazing? That would be amazing in some ways, right? But there's the craft element of it and the process that you need to go through, and that kind of like discovery phase that I think is necessary.
What about you, Zach? What do you think? Do you think that, especially in the world we're living right now, where apparently it's so hard to understand each other, do you think this kind of technology or this kind of scenario could be interesting and positive?
I mean, I'm really reluctant to answer this question. I feel like there's an aspect of kind of always in kind of Silicon Valley, techno utopian, you know, we can use technology to solve the world's problems. I do think we need, I love the idea of story, like that story and narrative where I generally feel like we're drowning in data. Like we have data, we have numbers, we have, you know, there's so much information, there's so much like real-time streams, but stories are what help us learn, and stories are the things that we take away. And I always think about kind of as a creator, what is the difference between telling a joke and telling a story, right? A joke is something like you might laugh, it might get an immediate response, but you'll forget about it, right? Some jokes are not like that. Some jokes will get in your head, you'll retell them, they live in your head. But stories are these things that they're so important for, just for communication. And so I don't know, in general, I feel like technology that's in service of storytelling can be really powerful. But I am really reluctant to kind of say, okay, we can use technology to solve this problem and this problem and this problem. I think that is a real like simplistic thinking. And it's a kind of it's one of the, one major problem we have in the world right now.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So now I want to take you back to the surface, to the practical world, but not before trying to summarize the very important key points that you've mentioned. And I would like to rescue perhaps the most important one that you mentioned: education and community building. These are elements that are extremely necessary in order to perform deep transformations that don't fall into this kind of simplistic scenarios of techno optimism. Uh, Specifically, like, I would like you to tell me, how do you foresee a world, or how do we encourage a world where we have more of these elements, where we have more community building, more enabling of this kind of technology and knowledge, but of course grounded in the practical world? What would you say, Chad?
Oh man. Well, I think that I'm self-taught on all this stuff, and without the availability of all this information, that would be impossible. So that's a huge part of it, is just the availability to all this information at the click of a button that no one ever had before. Which means you're gonna have a lot more people trying to solve these problems. I think so. Is the question around educating people on the technology, or educating or solving social problems with the technology?
Well, I guess the point is, we see these tools,
Mm-hmm.
or in their access to them, as one of the drivers of future inequality, probably.
Yeah,
So the
I think that,
accessibility to them is important, like you're
yeah,
mentioning.
accessibility obviously is just going to have to come with time. But in terms of being able to experience, also real quick, going back to the other part of it, being able to experience other people's thoughts and things like that, I'm not sure if that's even something we'll be able to get to, with how encoded our thinking is based on our experiences and our language and everything. I think it could just make people's heads explode if they all of a sudden were sensing whatever or somebody else was experiencing. It could just be so entirely different. But in terms of how it could address some of these social issues and just human problems, I think avatars, you can obviously have your appearance be whatever you want. So hopefully that could, if we still have racial inequalities, that could be a way of creating a more level playing field, as you are just kind of masking what's back there, if that's the goal. Obviously, I don't mean that in terms of hiding who you are, but in terms of creating an equal playing field based on no physical attributes holding anybody back. I think that there's also a huge opportunity if you look at how us staying inside has impacted the environment and the ecosystem. I think that there's some real benefits of us working virtually or digitally that could have really profound impacts on the environment. They could really help it recover. So I think there's a lot of social and ecological impacts that we haven't even really thought of yet. But I think there's a lot of them. But I think there's a lot of negative potential impacts too.
Like, do you think that as an artist you're trying to create awareness around certain matters of concern?
As an artist, my goal is always to just help people realize that they're capable of way more than they realize. I mean, really, when it comes down to it, that's like what skateboarding taught me. And it was the most profound thing ever for me. And that's kind of just what I always try to communicate, or it's me just venting. But for the most part, if there's something I'm trying to get across to somebody, that's really what my message is. And I think that this is a way of enabling that for sure.
And I think it's interesting because being a skateboarder that jumps into digital art, is self-taught, and then grows within that realm in a self-taught manner, just like you probably did with like, do you see a relationship between the skateboarding community, the self-taught nature of skateboarding, and this other realm?
There's so many skateboarders who have gotten into 3D that I've forced myself to kind of figure out why. And I think that there's this perfect analogy of like unlimited creativity. There's no rules. You can do it whenever you want to. You're only limited by your own creativity, really. And I think that that's why it's been really appealing to a lot of skateboarders and why it was so appealing to me.
I think that's a very, very interesting point. What about you, Daniela? How did you capture this?
I see technology. I understand that, yeah, the access to technology might bring a bit of inequality, but over the years, what I've seen is that actually access to technology has lowered the barriers to those inequalities, because then you have self-taught people that can actually start creating tools, that can start proposing things, that can start creating art, that can, there's like all this world that is now being created by people that don't necessarily have to go through a very expensive university and learn everything through there. So
that's interesting too. Just to touch on that, I think it's really interesting too, because you don't need physical resources sometimes to provide value in these spaces where you traditionally would as like a community.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on. I just thought that was really
No, yeah, it's yeah. I mean that's essentially it. I mean, my background is industrial design. I didn't know much about technology before, starting Gravity Sketch maybe a few years later when I did my master's. But the fact that I had available all those resources as easy as just going to the internet, Googling something and just like finding the answers and learning how to use it, allowed me to eventually create a prototype that now created an entire company that now more creatives are using. So, like now it's just giving everyone access to, not everyone, but a lot of more people access to be able to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm. You've enabled them to now create new things.
Yes, exactly.
And of course, like this has to lead with you, Zach, because you are, after all, a founder of a new type of model of school, because you were tired of the traditional models of universities and the whole system. So can you tell us more about your project, the School for Poetic Computation?
Sure. So about 7 years ago, some friends and I got really tired of university life and being kind of, adjunct teacher, becoming professor, like getting in that kind of what it's like to be in academia. We got really tired of it. And we noticed that colleges were getting more and more expensive. So if you go to, I was teaching at Parsons, and just the cost for graduate school to come to this, and it was going higher and higher and higher, but I could not figure out where the money was going. And, and I would see these big buildings and college campuses making, satellite campuses in Dubai and, all across the world. And I didn't understand the economics and the situation of higher education. And I felt like maybe it would make sense to have a space where, we could explore these ideas at a much lower cost and in a more kind of playful way. So we started this school, and we've been running it for 7 years now. And the thing that I would say, and this really kind of touches on what Daniela was saying, is that, we oftentimes these projects start with small experiments, and then they become something larger. It starts with a demo or a tool, and then people are attracted to it, and you build a community around it. It becomes a company. And the thing that I always want to say to young people is that the world is hungry for tools. The world is hungry for new schools. The world is hungry for new places. Like, these things exist, right? But that there are lots of spaces in the world to be building, to be building new tools and new platforms for education. The School for Poetic Computation runs a 10-week program where typically we have people come from around the world and take classes in code, electronics, and theory, and all in the service of making art. And it's a kind of like a short version of what you would get if you were doing a 2-year master's course. And we've been doing like always in person in New York. And this spring, obviously, our spring cohort, we had to cancel it, refund everybody, and we've moved completely online. And there are a lot of challenges with teaching online, and there's really, Zoom fatigue, like being in Zoom calls, and you all know what I'm talking about, this kind of fatigue, and there's a lot of the magic of the school is not in the classroom, but actually in the space around class and in eating meals together and students teaching each other. And, the feeling at a dinner party where you just hear somebody talking about something on one side and you hear another conversation on another side, and you might jump from one conversation to another. That's really hard to do in this context. So I think the biggest challenge we have right now is how do we take the culture and the energy of the school and bring that online? Teaching is not a problem. Giving lectures, sharing code, get students doing work, sharing their work with each other. It works. It's not it's not as good as being in person, but also there are students who couldn't come to America because of visa issues or cost, or, there are students who for physical issues couldn't come to study in person. And also I think there are students for whom it's really great to have something to be thinking about besides the world, to have, you can use education as an escape. You can have a moment where you focus on the things that you're learning and, kind of dive deep into them. So, we started to offer these classes online, and they've been quite popular, and, we're still figuring out how to do this in the best way. But I do want to reiterate that idea that, these platforms, the world needs new schools, the world needs new tools, and it's really important. I think as a young person coming up, it's really, really easy to feel like you don't know where the space is to make new things, but it's just important to say that over and over again.
That's excellent. So how does this change the game? How does this change the profession of the creator, the artist, the designer? How does this availability and the change? Maybe you don't need design schools anymore.
I mean, I would say the world that I know is the world of creative coding, and having open source tools, things like processing, Arduino, open frameworks. These tools have been around for a long time now, 15 years, 10 years, and they made it easier. They made it so that you don't need a computer science degree. You don't need an electrical engineering degree in order to use these things in a creative way. And they also they lowered that barrier so that you wind up with, just really interesting people coming together and sharing. And then the community grows, and the libraries and plugins and tools, they grow. And it just, I think that just raises the work that everybody does. So I feel like these tools they're open source, they're free. You pay in different ways. You pay with your time, or you pay in some other way, but they're free, and they have meant that, generations of students can learn code, and it's outside of a company. It's outside of, I remember when I learned Flash, and I loved Flash, but when Flash went down, it was I will never trust a big company. If I'm going to learn to code, I'm not going to learn to code on some platform. It's got to be open source. It has to be
exactly.
It has to be this kind of thing that's going to be sustainable and be around for the long term.
There's got to be a standard. Exactly. There has to be standards on all this stuff, because otherwise it's just about individuals learning and progressing in their own little bubble instead of collectively pushing this thing forward.
So I think this is a very, very good point to round up before we open with audience questions. I like the way this conversation has turned out to focus itself around the importance of people, not technology. It's all about how we teach each other, how we build a community, how we empower others. And then all of this just happens organically. The empowerment, the enabling of more creative tools happens organically. Now, there's this one first question. It says, as artists and designers, we're often neglected in our profession, since more attention is paid to other kind of expressions that are easier to be monetized. How could we welcome the new world, knowing that we must reconfigure our profession to be more competitive in our economy? And how to revive the economy in the artistic and designer world?
I would say that I don't necessarily disagree, but I would say that the designer and the creative and the artist are increasingly being more important in the
I would
industry.
agree. I think
Because
people, no, sorry, go ahead.
no, well, I was going to say because before we were really focused on creating the technology, creating the products, creating whatever needed to be created, and focusing on the engineering or the production or whatever that might be. But now we reached a point where the human aspect is the thing that is going to differentiate anything that we do, and who's good at
Exactly.
that? Designers.
Yeah, I think that the people with the money are starting to realize how to value creativity, and that it is the requirement for differentiating yourselves. And hopefully that is true.
Yeah.
And that is the case.
I think the thing I would say, I don't know if I can answer the question specifically, but I have always found it really valuable to have different parts of my life. Like I have teaching, I have artwork, and I have commercial work. And for me, those are sort of three legs of a stool. And I try to divide my time evenly doing the three of them. And some of them pay more, like the commercial work, you know, that's working with brands and whatnot, you know, that's, I could be doing that full time, be very profitable, but it's really nice to have this kind of three things that, you know, that play off of each other, and you can take something from one thing and bring it to another. And there have been periods in my life where having teaching, you know, even being an adjunct at Parsons, like that was regular paycheck, that was healthcare, you know, and it wasn't like it wasn't a ton of money, but it was great to have a check every 2 weeks, to have something kind of regular. And I think there are ways that you can structure, at least I have found that you can structure your life. If you find that you like to do a variety of things, you can balance them and have them play off of each other, you know, and you could be working for brands, and you could be selling prints, you could be teaching, and you can have these sort of like, I almost think that in today's era, it makes sense to have a variety of income streams in a way that, you know, if you're, it depends. You could also be working for a company. You could be owning your, you know, creating a company, et cetera. But like I'm sort of outside of that. And I've found that it's been really helpful to I feel almost like a fisherman, right? Like I'm like fish, you know, I have a net over here, I have a net over here. And you're kind of like, you piece all these things together and you make a life out of them.
That's beautiful. That's great. I like hearing that now. I can reflect that on me and tell that it's totally true. And they fill different needs that I have, like problem solving versus just being creative. But yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think that and if the creative's job is to continue to differentiate product and companies, then it would probably be best advised that the creatives also find ways to continue differentiating themselves by learning constantly and learning these new tools. Because Illustrator and Vector is straight into this stuff, and Pixels are straight into this stuff. Like, it's just a natural evolution, I think, of how these tools are going to go.
What do you think is the relationship between social media and the way this is gaining value, like the artists and designers' work?
I'd be curious about Gravity Sketch and how Gravity Sketch, like, what is the social component of that, and how do your creators work with social media?
Well, I would say social media is kind of like and I think for many creatives, it's become kind of like the way in which they outlet all of this work that they're doing. Creatives, as you mentioned, like they have the regular work sometimes, and they have their personal work, and you never really stop creating. And in some way, this is kind of like a way to just expose themselves to the world, but also bring comments from someone else. So in the case of the Gravity Sketch users, sometimes they'll post something that they've done in Gravity Sketch that looks really kind of like weird, or like they can't really figure out how they did that specific shape because it's a 3D model. But then, you know, if you did it in another CAD software, it probably took you like 3 months to achieve. So they start a conversation around that, and then becomes a snowball of, well, actually, have you tried this other tool? Have you tried this trick? and it becomes this community that is just constantly teaching. So it goes back to what you were saying, Zach, around the thing around the classroom, that it's like students teaching each other. And I think that's one of the most fruitful parts of being in a university or in education. It's like having that, and I think social media is helping with it at a wider level.
And I think that's interesting. Coming from personally an engineering background, I remember when there was a huge reluctance on the usage of Arduino because they wanted the students to use something more hardcore, no? Because Arduino was seen as this design tool, no? And now I see the opposite in the university where I teach. It's actually encouraging all students, all engineering students also, to use these kind of tools because it makes that barrier of entry lower. Do you think that's also happening with all of these tools? That first there's a reluctance, first there's a no, I am used to doing this with Rhino, with SolidWorks, or with another tool, and then they're like, oh wow, why was I being so stubborn around the tool?
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's a human thing. Like somehow we think that if there's something new coming to our lives, it needs to replace something else, as opposed to just seeing, how we're going to be opening our tool set or horizons. So the minute this clicks into different people, then that's when it starts becoming kind of like a natural thing to adopt. So in the case of Arduino, and in the case of every single tool, in the case of Gravity Sketch, we see it a lot, especially in universities where they're like, no, we don't want students to be going directly into 3D. They need to learn how to sketch first. And it's like, but it's just sketching. It's the same. But you have this conception that it's 3D, so it's CAD. So you need to, that's cheating. So you need to leave it to the end or something.
I think this is the biggest shift in thinking that humans are going to be faced with, I think, ever. I mean, we're really going from just being analog physical creatures to working in a virtual way. And it's completely different, but it's so much more similar to how we are naturally than just like this digital world.
Only with magic, no? The other day we were just in a session, people were swimming through hoops.
It is magic, and the developers are the warlocks making the spells for us. That's the only way I can ever describe it.
I don't want to say one more thing, and then I have to jump off because I have to go teach. I really love the idea also that knowledge of the tool as important as knowing how to use the tool. So this is something that Kevin Kelly says, and I just love this phrase, that knowing that the tool exists is just as important as knowing how to use the tool. Like there's one thing you can learn how to use Arduino. That's really important. But just knowing that Arduino is there and what that tool means and what that means for you. And that's the thing I constantly encourage students and young professionals to do is learn about all these tools, learn about them, learn. You don't have to learn them. You don't have to, be masters in all of them. But if you can get a sense of the wide range of the tools that exist, then you can think differently about your creative process. That you will be like, oh, I can connect this with this. I can take this with this. And creativity is all about combinatorial thinking. And so if you can be fluid with the way that you're making, then you can be really, I think that's the key to being creative.
So Zach, just one final statement on your behalf before you jump off.
Yeah. Oh, one final statement. I want to reiterate what I said. Two things, which is this is a really important moment. So please pay attention. Please listen. Please talk to people. It's a moment where I heard this great phrase yesterday, which is imperfect ally. You don't have to be perfect with what you say, but you have to say something. It's a really important time to be vocal. And the second thing is the world is hungry for ideas. The world is hungry for new tools, for new schools, for new platforms. And so, if you're young and coming up, just know that there's space for you to make your things.
Zach, thank you so much. Have a successful class.
Thank you.
We're here with you.
It was a pleasure. Have fun.
Perfect. So we're just going to round up a couple more questions if you like from the audience. We have one for chat. What is the relationship between art and technology in these hard times?
I think art is simply an output from somebody that is filtering an experience through their own experiences, and it's the output of that. It's the output of an experience, and I think that technology just enables us to communicate better. It enables us to communicate our ideas or our feelings better. I definitely can communicate concepts much better in 3D than I could sketching. So I think that it's going to continue to enable us to materialize what's in our head, simply put. And I think that that's pretty much what art is trying to communicate what that vision is in your head.
What about you, Daniela? Like, what do you think is this relationship?
Yeah, I would say the same as Chad. That is, it's exactly that. It's like you have something in your head. We have different mediums. We have had different ones throughout the human history, right? And now we have this extra level of tools, which is technology, that is just enabling us to go even deeper sometimes in how we express that experience that we've had through the art or the design that we're making.
Okay, so I would like to ask you guys on behalf of the audience, if you were back in the beginning of your careers as designers, what would you advise your past selves?
I would advise myself to be less focused, which goes back to this, like now there's like this wider variety of tools that I have available in my tool set. And back then I was so focused on designers only learn this, designers should only focus on this, that it didn't really allow me to just open my net a bit wider until really like later on in my career, that when I finally did that, it enabled me to start thinking about kind of like crazier or better or like much more interesting ideas, as opposed to just kind of like being restricted by a very set process that somehow somebody set. But yeah.
And that's a problem because you were a design student, no? So ironically, being a student kind of forced you to look in a narrow way. And in contrast, Chad, I would like to think that because you were completely self-taught and your school was the skateboard, maybe you had the opposite.
For me, it's definitely coming to terms with the fact that no one knows everything, and that maybe even just because I don't have a formal training doesn't mean that I can't participate in that world, or that I don't have the knowledge of it. Yeah, I think that I think a lot of people want to hold on to traditional ways of working based on who they look up to. And I think that people just need to be take a lot more risk, like just embrace, it sounds so cliche and so corny, but just embrace what your uniquities are, embrace being different, and try to find a way to convert that into a positive or a strength.
And I think this is, something that I personally can feel related to, because I never studied design, and I am leading a design school. You, Daniela, did technology at your master's level. So you're a technologist that studied design. And I think that sort of naivety is very important in order to be a creator, Like if you have the rigidity of a tradition behind you, maybe you're not seeing the opportunities in front of you because you're stuck with this obstacle mind. So
Mhm.
I appreciate that from all of you as creators, like including Zach. I think that's a fantastic way to start closing down this conversation. Like before I give like a little wrap up, I would like you to say some final remarks and go crazy with them.
Do you mind if I go, Daniela? I'm 3 minutes late for a meeting,
Go for
but
it, Chad.
I will happily say this. I would just like to kind of recap what I said before. Like, don't be afraid of this technology. It's not going away. And if you want to be able to stay on the forefront of design or art, you need to figure out how to work in this space. So don't be afraid of it. Don't think it's tech weird stuff. It started by tech people because they're interested. It's going to quickly become embraced by designers and become a lower barrier to entry. It's going to have better experience. So embrace it. Start to look into it now before you get caught off guard. And
Well said.
and help people learn. Give back to what you've been given. If people have helped teach you, then turn around and give that back and help teach somebody else so we can continue to grow the community. And thank you for what you've done, Daniela. It's an awesome tool. I love it.
Oh, thanks, Chad. Thank you.
But I have to go. Like I said, I'm sorry. This has been an incredible opportunity, and I appreciate all the questions from the community too.
Well, thank you very much, Chad, and it's a pleasure having
Absolutely.
you here.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully, we will do this again.
Indeed. Take care. Bye. Great day. And Daniela, finishing with you, you get to have that final closing remark in this very exciting episode.
Yeah, I would say that along the lines of what it's already been said, it's embrace the change, because I think, well, the change in terms of like how we're evolving into being more technological beings, but I think that's just natural, right? So and I think it's happening naturally in the design and the creative world. We're just creating beings, right? So if we see something that we think it's interesting that we need to adopt, we'll just do it, but just try to do it quicker and try to do it without any fear, because the tools and the technology that is being developed is just being developed as something that requires people to experiment with it, to use it, to propose new things. So we actually need the designers, the creatives, to be able to just push things even further. So feel that you are the ones that are going to be kind of like pushing the barriers. Like the technology is already there, but you guys are the ones that are going to just like continuously creating and proposing new things.
And I think it's very exciting to be able to create a new medium of expression like you're doing, like being a pioneer in a complete new field. And like whenever I think about the media, like someone creates a new medium, new medium, and then the creators come and fill it up and explore it in ways that you probably could not imagine that someone would.
I think that's the thing that makes me wake up every morning. Is like we created a tool, but we've never imagined the incredible work that would be done inside of that tool. Like, it's people, crazy talented people just going in and creating really interesting things that in a way continue to give us feedback so that the tool continues to improve. So it's kind of like a machine that keeps growing by having people in our community continuously helping us grow the tool and make it more useful and interesting for them.
Thank you very, very much, Daniela. And with this, I would like to start wrapping the session up by summarizing perhaps some of the most important points. I found very interesting how this session became centered or around the importance of education and community, the availability of the tools, and the relationship between the tool creators and the tool users in order to grow these kind of projects. And I especially liked Zach's remark about the caution of being completely optimistic about technology, but also contrasting it with the positive sides around technology and its usages, such as a tool like Gravity Sketch. And I think it's been a fantastic session. Thank you very much, Daniela. Again, thanks
My pleasure.
to Chad and to Zach who have to leave. And on behalf of It's a Brave New World, I thank both the organizations that make this possible, What Design Can Do, specifically What Design Can Do Mexico and Centro de Futuros for the Tec de Monterrey, and our many allies who are cross-posting this across the web, eDesign Tech, Abierto Mexicano de Diseño, Cool Hunter de México, Adiseño, Unitec Honduras, y Noise Lab. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll have another chance to catch up in the future.
I hope so too. Thank you.